My first port of call is to preserve as much freedom of speech as possible and to restrict any laws that we might want to bring in that will reduce speech.
When co-opted by extremists, the internet and social media become tools that not only amplify hate, they spread it.
As we come on the air, we're learning more about the shooter's additional plans. Officials say they are investigating this as a federal hate crime, calling it the act, quote, pure evil.
In Buffalo, New York, the self-avowed white supremacist, allegedly responsible for the massacre of 10 people, issued a hate manifesto, apparently influenced by the words and the actions of the terrorist responsible for the murder of 51 Muslims in Christchurch. Following those 2019 terror attacks against 2 mosques, a New Zealand Royal Commission of Inquiry noted a consistent association between online hate speech and real-world hate crimes. That tension between words written and spoken and real-world events is just one of a number of complex issues being weighed in a review of New Zealand's hate speech laws.
I would still feel highly uncomfortable about hate speech provisions generally, but I guess given what's happened in New Zealand in the past and what's happening overseas at times now too, I am interested in if it is possible to clarify our existing legislation, and if so, I would restrict the speech considerably, keep it as simple as possible. The proposal talks about, I'm just looking here for the wording that they suggested, and seem very confident about the proposal, and getting rid of the terms hostility, ill will and contempt and ridicule and replacing that with hatred. I certainly agree that that is a good idea. Those are, the more terms you have, for one thing, the more possibility of, or the more uncertainty there is. They're all slightly different. So if you can replace them with one, that's a good idea. Hatred, it will put the pressure on this idea of hatred and what we understand hatred to be. Often you find when judges define hatred, they come back to those terms like hostility or ill will. If we don't do it properly, lots of people who are speaking or publishing online who shouldn't be in prison and shouldn't be criminalised. The silly 16-year-old boy in his room at night playing around and retweeting something, or just not even thinking about the consequences of what he's doing. What do we do? Throw him in prison? No, that's not the way to go. So there are lots of complex issues around this, and the problem of extremism has become more prominent. It's come into focus, and I think probably it's, expanding a bit because of the internet, but those are policing issues as much as anything else. People think the law solves everything, and so if you say we're going to develop a hate speech law, we're going to clarify our hate speech law, and that will make it a lot clearer for everyone will know only the worst forms of speech will be caught by this law and so on. You immediately give a great deal of hope to people who are offended by speech, and they invest a great deal of hope, and that proposal becomes the thing that they feel will solve what are often societal issues, bigger societal issues, such as racism, for example. And the Royal Commission was right to identify that it wasn't just about the law and bringing in a criminal offence. I mean, they're difficult enough on their own, hate speech offences. And of course, they made 44 recommendations. The government accepted them all. And a lot of them are about trying to develop greater social cohesion.
In our marketplace of ideas, we're not all equal. It's like we're all in the same boat. No, we're not. We're all in the same storm. We're in different boats, and some of them leak terribly. So not everyone has the same voice.
Correct, and that's one argument that's made in relation to the way women are treated. And it's often said, well, if women are upset about things that are said about them, the way they're objectified and proliferation of pornography and all of that, why don't they just, especially now, get online and answer back? Why don't they use their speech? And the answer to that, and from most minority groups, as well, we don't have as much access. We might be online, no one's listening to us. Mainstream media are more attention is paid to them, so it should be them that are subject to rules about any changes that need to be made. But now also the internet is coming into that as well, and people are realising that maybe service providers and so on should be regulated in some way as well. They might say we're doing more, we've got more people, going through our content and getting rid of anything that looks bad. But how do we know what they're doing? How does any government, which acts for the people of a country, how do they know that there's consistency? How do they know the grounds on which information is being censored or taken down by those companies? You don't get a look in, whereas if states get involved, it has to be transparent. We have those requirements in a democracy that everything's as open as possible. So what a lot of countries are doing at the moment when they're looking at getting their online services to regulate more and self-regulate and feel better about that because they're self-regulating, they're trying to sort of make it almost a co-form of regulation, and they're looking at not just imposing offences and making criminal law because they'll have to have oversight of that themselves and make sure they're resourced, their police and all of the government services that should be involved in that sort of thing. If they can get the actual online provider to regulate itself as a first step, then that's cheaper and it's also a better idea. So they're setting up codes and developing basic codes, and they're saying to the online providers, you've got to regulate and look after your own content on the basis of these codes. So you might have your own systems and your own panels and so on that do that, but you've got to follow this code that says you should worry about accuracy, hate speech, all the things they think they should worry about. First and foremost, and the more I've been involved in this issue, the more I've come to believe this, is our education system. And so the recommendations of the Royal Commission on what should be done within education, I think, are very important. And I've suggested at various forums and so on about this, that I think there should be an NCEA course that's taught at least from year 9. And by the time, of course, it comes into NCEA, it becomes compulsory. That should be it's going to be an interesting, rich course, actually, that will combine a number of things, which will be civics, you've mentioned that, critical thought, civics, technology, how to use it properly, but also how to use it responsibly. And then world religions, and this isn't religious studies, this is the study of the main religions in the world. From a sort of social studies perspective, not from a religious perspective. So those are the basics that I think should be in there. And I think we've needed a course like this for years, actually. The Commission made some suggestions around this, and some of them have been worked on by the Ministry of Education. They are looking at, in a sort of piecemeal way, I've been following some of the process, educational initiatives that might advance more social cohesion, and I think that's a great idea. They're starting right back at early childhood learning centres, for example, looking at how to teach very young children responsibility and self-control, those sorts of things. So I certainly think it should start early, but I don't see anything for that to feed into later in the education system, and that's why I believe that some real course in the curriculum that leads into NCEA or whatever is appropriate at that point in the years 11 to 13. That's my baseline, because then we'll have fewer of these problems arising.